A family is like a tree whose branches spread above, with fruit and blossom, year by year, grown from roots of love. Welcome back to Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast. I am your host, Phil Gonzalez, and this week, boy, what a trip it's been just getting my hands on this book. Now, this week's book is from 2019, and I bought it in physical paperback when it first came out. I believe I had this book pre-ordered well in advance of its release because it was a watershed moment. It was a groundbreaker. It was a huge deal. I believe also that Brad and Jeremy and I were given the heads up from Mike before this book came out that it was going to contain some pertinent information to the history of Bear Country, that it was going to blow our little minds, and that it did. So much so that when it first dropped, I actually released an episode about one page of this book because I knew back in 2019 that it was going to be at least 5 years before I covered it. And it is. It has been 5 years leading up to me covering it. And then, of course, I sit down to record and I can't find my copy. I have buckets of Berenstain Bears books. I have three big just tubs of Berenstain Bears books in my bedroom, and then I have two enormous tubs downstairs in the basement. I also have stacks of Berenstain Bears books just laying around waiting to be covered, and stuff just on the shelves that I haven't gotten around to putting away. I have kept this week's book in a pride of place somewhere in the house, set aside in anticipation of covering it to such a degree that I've lost it. I have no idea where it is. I looked in all the tubs. I searched through stacks of books. I looked under clothes piles. I remember that it was on the dresser in the bedroom forever, just sitting there waiting to be covered. It was just there, I would come across it all the time and be like, hey, I'm nervous about covering this book. I'm going to put it off until I'm in the right, until I've reached those years, and then I'm in the right mood for it, because it's an intense book because of the subject matter, which I've already covered. So I don't know why I was so iffy about covering it. It's an important book, and of course I can't find it. So I was like, fine. Far be it from me to not buy multiple copies of a book. I go online to order a new copy, and this is yesterday. So I'm like, I can rush a copy to my house. This is yesterday. This book's out of print. This book is no longer, as far as I can tell, being published in any way, shape, or form. It's also never been released as a digital book. Fine, I say. I hop online, go to the library website. Oh, look, there's a copy of it on the shelf at the library that's like a 10 or 15 minute walk from my house. All I have to do is put on my dancing shoes and head up the road to the East Lake Library here in Minneapolis, which I do. It opens at 9 a.m. today. I hop down there, look on the shelf. They have a bucket of Berenstain Bears books. Like, that's it. It's just they have them set aside. All the Berenstain Bears books in a bucket. See them there. It's first time readers flipping through, flip, and of course it's not there. So I look in the Berenstain Bears early readers section. Like maybe someone just misshelved it. Maybe it's down below with the general story books. No, nothing, and no. Go up to the librarian. She's very nice. She goes and checks in the back for me. She checks on the shelves for me. She even flips through the bucket that I've already flipped through twice. Not there. She turns to me apologetically. I'm sorry, it just looks like it's a misplaced book. Now, there's 34 other copies floating around the library system. So I try to find other copies of it within a reasonable driving distance of my house. The closest one is in Brooklyn Park, and I was just like, you know what? Forget it. I'm not driving that far to get my hands on this book. So I ended up, for a book I own, that I have a physical copy of somewhere in this house, relying on the goodness of the weird YouTube subset of human beings who record themselves reading children's books. That's right. In order to get my hands on this book in some format or another, I watched 5 or 6 recordings of people reading this book to their subscribers. The people who seem to have more subscribers than I do, people who definitely have more subscribers than I do, not all of whom are the greatest children's book readers in the world, I will be generous to say, but who seem to have attracted a following or an audience. In case you don't know, there is this wild, just underworld of YouTube videos that is just people reading children's books. And these pages, these YouTube channels some of these people have hundreds and hundreds of videos of them. And I mean just reading books, not like these are just recorded on their phone, not even a modern phone, it seems, with the phone just sort of hovering above the book, sort of shaky and moving around a lot. Them flipping the pages, sort of not necessarily accurately reading the words that are printed on the page, mispronouncing things, stuttering, stopping. So there's no editing. It just goes. And these people, but you know what? When you can't find a book, sometimes you just got to sit back and have it be read to you over YouTube. So that's what I did. And I nabbed some screenshots from those YouTubers who were so kind as to illegally upload themselves reading a book. I assume this is against copyright or whatever, but no one seems to care. This is in no way replacing the purchasing of these books, except in my case, but I already own the book. I just can't find it, and it's not available digitally. So, Mike, I don't know why these books are out of print. This is one of the most foundational books in the series. What's going on? Is there rights issues? Hit me up. Let me know. I want to know. If you don't write to me, Mads, write to me. Somebody write to me. Let me know what the story is with these out-of-print Berenstain Bears books, especially this week's book, which is the Berenstain Bears Big Family Album. Yes, from 2019, Mike Berenstain's The Berenstain Bears Big Family Album. Much like Welcome to Bear Country, this is a book that is just sort of laying it out for you. It's laying out some answers for you. You ever wondered about the Berenstain Bears extended family, what order things go in? Well, here we go. It's the Big Family Album. Now, is it just a big family album? No, there's a bit of a story. Not much of a story, but there's a bit of a story. And I'm going to take you through it right now. So let's hop into it. Now, this is the Big Family Album. It's a unique book, unique in its world. So we start off with brother, sister, and honey. They're going to go, I love this, there's an opening spread. That's brother and sister and on their bikes, honey on her tricycle, and they're biking and triking to Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house. And they're thinking about going to Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house. And we know that because there's a thought bubble above the three cubs' heads of them thinking about going to Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house, which is right ahead of them. It's sort of this weird recursive, like it was just a short bike ride away, and we know that because we can see it, and we know that they're looking forward to it because they're thinking it. It's just this like narration. It's like brother and sister and honey knew there was always a warm welcome waiting for them at Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house, and of course it was just a short bike ride away. So one lazy Saturday afternoon they found themselves happily pedaling along to visit their grandparents, and everything is mentioned in this opening narration is visible in this spread. I'm not knocking the image. It's just, it's very funny. It's very literal. Like Mike is like, okay, I'm gonna show them biking to their Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house. I'm gonna show the reader, besides just telling them that it's not that far because they're pretty much across the street from each other, I'm going to show that they're looking forward to it by showing them thinking about visiting their Grizzly Gramps, which they're already doing. We know they're going there. They're daydreaming about meeting their Gramps and Gran, which literally is going to happen in literally 30 seconds. They are yards from the dooryard, and what we see in their mind's eye will be happening in reality. As readers, are we correct? Well, yes, we are, because 1 second later, Grizzly Gramps is greeting them at the door with a "Why, hello there." And you're just in time. And the Cubs are like, just in time? Well, we were just coming to visit. Just in time for what? Is there a surprise? He's like, yeah. And they smell through cartoon wafting coming down the hallway. And by cartoon wafting, I mean like when a cartoon character can see smells. And you see the smells coming in through the air currents. We see the smells coming. Time for what? And they smell with their bare noses. Good smells. Gran is cooking. They're in time to gobble it down. Gobble that cooking. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, we are 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages into this book. Where's the Big Family Album? We haven't gotten to it yet. We haven't gotten to the Big Family Album yet. Wait, hold on. There's setup. We need an elaborate setup in order to wonder why the Cubs would be looking through a photo album. I mean, they could just show up and Gramps is like, look what I found. We've got to make Gramps be Gramps. And when I say we got to make Gramps be Gramps, I mean we got to put these cubs to work. So they're looking forward to the smells, the stinks, and the aromas. She's got Gran, who we do not get to see. Gran is making her fresh-baked honey nut cake, which sounds delightful and delicious. I'm imagining a very sweet, but like a sticky sweet, spice cake with nuts, flavored with honey. I can smell it already. We're on the cusp of fall here in Minnesota. If it would just stop being warm for a single day and get to them fall temperatures, we'd be very happy, and I would have this aroma 24/7 in my nose, the smell of spice cake. So they're looking forward to eating the spice cake. It smells great. And Gramps is like, ha, not yet. Just time for that later. Get up the ladder. We're hauling junk into the attic. And they look, and there is a mountain of boxes waiting for them. Now, the cubs, as far as I know, weren't beckoned to Grizzly Gramps and Gran's house. They went of their own free will. They went out of the goodness of their heart. They just wanted to hug their grandparents, who are not long for this world. They're the rare young generation who values the old. And they're put to work immediately. Gramps is like, no food for you until you haul stuff up into my attic. And they're like, we just want the nut cake. We just want the nut cake, Grandpa. He grabs a box, nimbly leaps up the stairwell, and they follow behind, hauling heavy boxes and baskets. Boxes and baskets lugged behind Gramps. We get some... Mike is at his, I won't say best, but I will say one of my favorite Mike strengths is drawing consternated young bears. And there are consternated young bear faces all about this book, as they are not. I also like it when the cubs are like, we are good children, but we have our limits. And you know that Grizzly Gramps is probably the bear in bear country most likely to push a young bear to their limits. They haul the stuff up there. They haul it into the attic. It's such a pain in the batutus. Sorry, I had to keep from using foul language, blue words on the podcast. It's such a pain in their bum. It's such a hauling nightmare that even the little 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 4-year-old Honey Bear hurts her back doing it. You see her like stretching out her lower back. She's like, oh God, should have used a lifting belt. This doesn't meet OSHA standards. Yeah, you injured the preschooler, Gramps. Good work. Top aces. Gramps is bustling around. He's straightening things up. He has a box of old Christmas lights. We see some sort of like armoire or something. We see one of his ships in the bottle, which I guess he's done with, not doing ships in the bottle anymore. And we see the Red Book of Westmarch just sitting out. Leather-bound book. And this is the real reason he got the cubs up there. Obviously, he wanted to show them the big family album, but he needed also some stuff done. But the book is out. He plops it down in front of this, covered in dust. This man has not looked at this photo album in years. It is coated in a coating of grime, an ancient grimoire, bound in barbed wire, covered in burlap, with a sign affixed to the outside that says, do not open, do not read. But he plops it down in front of them. They hear whisperings coming from the book. Open me, read me out loud. Oh, well, chew. What is it? Says brother. He sneezes. Achoo. We see him in the illustration sneezing. It says in the narration, what? Achoo. Is it? Asked brother, sneezing mightily from all the dust. It's our Bear Family album, said Gramps. It's the history of who we are and where we come from. Now, if there's one thing I love in the Berenstain Bears books, it's unnecessary history. Unnecessary to any narration, but that fills in the lore. Bear country lore. We've covered a ton of it. The Great Bear War. The history of vaudeville. Wax museums, which play a much bigger part in bear country history than we thought. Bear country geography. Cryptids. Weird religious sects. Murder. Drug dealing. Gun violence. We've covered all of it on this show. But let's go a little deeper. Let's look at some pictures from the past. First, we see the family tree. And I'm going to come out right on and say, I don't understand how this family tree works at all. This is our family tree, said Gramps. He turned the page. It's a big, colorful family tree. It says the Bear family tree. So this is the Bear family. Now, as someone who dabbles in family trees myself, when I have a spare second, I'll play around with an online family tree. And I have hundreds of people in this tree that, because it's online. So like as soon as you make a connection, it finds more connections for you. And I'm like, great. I'll happily look up my fathers, uncles, third cousins, ex-wives, children's, stepfather's family. Sure, that's fun. But when you look at a legit family tree like that, it is complicated and confusing. Now, fortunately, you can see family trees in multiple dimensions online. You can look at them in many different ways because they branch off in so many different directions. But when you follow a basic line, you can start at the top or you can start at the bottom. You start at the bottom with the youngest generation and you sort of grow up. That's the way they portray them online because you always know where you're starting with a family tree. You don't know where you're ending. Like, you always know I'm going to start like the youngest person is the youngest. And then you go up and it just sort of keeps going and going. You look further and further and further and further back. Now, you can say, well, you could start as far back as you can conceivably go, but there's always further you can go. The foundation always digs deeper. You can just keep finding more and more information. So it's interesting, the bear family tree starts at the bottom, like with the oldest known bear, I guess, but it only goes back to the 1700s. Like, I've traced my mother's family's roots back to the 1600s and beyond. Like, in Europe and in England, those records go way back. But I guess we've gone back about as far as we can, or as far as Grizzly Gramps is willing to. With Hezekiah Bear, in the 1700s, Hezekiah Bear was married to Mabel. And if you follow the tree up, on the right side, it seems to be that branch. But then on the left side, there's others, people like aunts and uncles and stuff. But it's really confusing how these people are all connected. Like, a family tree isn't a tree because it's a literal tree. It's a family tree because of the branches, right? But it's not really a tree. It's not like with leaves and stuff. I mean, you can decorate it to look like that. But a family tree is weird. It's a weird entity. It goes off in a lot of different directions. And this sort of tries to do that, but I don't understand. Looking at this image, I'm not really sure who's related to whom and what goes through where, because at the very top of the tree, not at the very top of the tree, but near the top of the tree, we have the cubs, we have brother, but then above brother is sister and honey and cousin Fred, but then above cousin Fred is Aunt Min, and Uncle whatever his name is. And then we have Tex over on the side who we've met, AJ, I don't know who that is. But also it says like 1700s. There's Hezekiah and his family. And then right above them we have 1800s. Rose and Henry. And then also someone named, look like Morty. And then right above that is the 1900s. Gramps and Gran. And then above them is Mama and Papa. And then above them is 2000s. And that's cousin Fred's sister. And what it would seem to be implying is that there is one generation of bears per century, which isn't how generations work. Like, it's not like we as bears, we wait until our 80s to reproduce. That's generally not how it works. We know for a fact from canon that Mama and Papa are in their late 20s? I know that we've recently discussed the fact on the Berenstain Bears Collectors group that Mama canonically, because of her age, gave birth to brother when she was 19 years old and Papa was 22, I think, 23. But we know, we'll cover that in a second because we're actually going to get to that. But the bears don't reproduce every 100 years. They reproduce as humans reproduce. Like, they become of reproducing age when they hit puberty, and then they start having kids, generally in their late teens, early 20s, which means that there would be more than one generation per century. So this family tree is off the rails. I don't understand. But in any case, let's get to Hezekiah. So Hezekiah and Abigail Grizzly, there's a drawing of them. I look like a woodcut of them from the 1700s. And she's wearing a bonnet. He's wearing a coonskin cap. They look pretty taciturn. And brother's like, well, why is this a drawing? Why isn't this a photograph? And Grizzly Gramps is like, because there were no cameras back then. And brother's a little bit blown away by this. I think it's that thing where you're looking at relatives of yours and you're like, these are actual ancestors of mine. These are people who are blood related to me. And they're existing in a time before modern technology. Not even before modern technology, before like basic photo technology existed. And that's kind of mind-blowing to a kid. We don't know anything else about these bears. They have a log cabin behind them. Some sort of animated pig hanging out with them. But other than that, don't know why they got a woodcut made of themselves standing in front of a log cabin. I assume it's their log cabin. But you know, I think he's holding something. It could be a gun. Not really sure what's going on. I have a feeling this is a reference to an actual drawing or sketch or something. I don't know. But Hezekiah and Abigail Grizzly, the patriarch and matriarch of the Bear Clan. It's strange that he could be related to anyone who lived so long ago, thinks Brother. Then we get a sort of a little like a page that has a few photographs of it says yellowed photos of bears, but they're not that yellowed. Also, some of them are old, seem to be old enough that they would have been in black and white. Anyway, I don't understand why they're in full color, but they're supposed to be old. But we see Flora and Dora Grizzly, which is interesting because we know that the Grizzlies and the Bears don't get along, so we don't know who they're related to. Cousin Ernie, we see Cousin Ernie's on a penny farthing bicycle. Marion and Al in a sort of a, not a Model T, but a ragtop car with, you know, but it's an old-timey car. I don't know what it's supposed to, I don't know cars. And then a cub, I guess, in a page boy cap, in suspendies and a bow tie named Georgie Bear. Don't know who Georgie Bear is. Perhaps he's the put-upon pie boy. I don't know. Put in his thumb, pulled out a plum. We don't know. Is that Georgie Porgy put upon pie? Your guess is as good as mine. But then we get a little reference to the Great Bear War. We see Great Uncle Morris, who's riding a horse. It says, Great Uncle Morris, who was in the cavalry of the Great Bear War. He's a mustachioed bear, as it said. In a uniform, he's holding a sword, sitting astride a horse, and Sister doesn't know the word. She says cavalry, and Gramps is like, cavalry. Get it right. Cavalry. It means soldiers on horses. Horses, of courses. So we see Great Uncle Morris, who fought in the Great Bear War against the Grizzlies. I don't know how Flora and Dora play into this. They're Grizzlies. Whatever. I assume his name is Morris Bear. Then we see a blacksmith, Great Grandpa Harry. Harry! And so Harry would have been, I mean, we don't know who's related to who, but Harry would seem to be Gramps' dad, Papa's grandfather. He was a blacksmith, made things out of iron. And Brother's like, yeah, look at his arms. He's strong. He's a strongman. Now, here's where things get fun. For me. For you, who knows? We have a picture of a frail-looking bear wearing a shawl and holding a book. Now, this is Aunt Emily. She was a poet. And I was like, Emily? Is this supposed to be like the bear equivalent of Emily Dickinson? Now, I'm not hugely familiar with Emily Dickinson. She had a short life. She lived from 1830 to 1886. She died at the age of 55. She was from Amherst, Massachusetts. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, I guess her whole life. But she wrote a poem that is parodied here. The poem in the Berenstain Bears book says, I'm a bear. Who are you? Are you a bear too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you know. And I was like, I don't know this poem. I don't know Emily Dickinson's poems, but it was easy to look up. And it is a poem, obviously, called I'm Nobody. Who are you? I'm Nobody. Who are you? It's a short poem by Emily Dickinson. Most of her poetry, by the way, most of her poems were not published until after her death, which I find interesting. But the actual poem is very short. It goes, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. I guess Emily Dickinson wrote a lot of poems about the joy of not anyone knowing who she is. And that, so it's funny that they used that poem of hers in this book because A, this is a book about finding out who your relatives are and finding out who people are, but also because they use the word a bear. Instead of saying, I'm nobody, who are you? They write, I'm a bear. Who are you? Are you a bear too? Not are you nobody. And it's funny that, like, I don't know. I'm thinking too hard about this. But it's funny that bear is traditionally a placeholder for person. Bear is traditionally a placeholder for any word. Anything that needs a signifier and identifier, we say bear in this book series. Not like Smurf, but like we've seen bear replace many descriptive terms in this book, in the sense of parody, in a sense of satire, in a sense of just sort of mirroring or paralleling our universe. So it's interesting that Mike has chosen to use the word bear to parallel the word nobody, because whereas bear is usually used to signify that you are an actual entity. You are an entity. Here it's used as a signifier to indicate that you are a nobody, that you do not exist, that you are imperceivable, that you prefer to not be seen. And it doesn't make any sense to me, but it's weird in the way it makes sense. There are implications of identity with using the word bear to mean nobody that I'm not qualified to discuss. Also, I'm not qualified to discuss Emily Dickinson. So let's just call it a wash. Call it a wash. We're shutting it down. Oh boy, here's where we get into some major continuity. We get a third retelling of a meet cute, of a meeting, of the history of Grizzly Gramps and Gran. That's right. We see a photograph of two young bears dancing on a stage. Well, who was that? Well, that's me and Gran back when we were a dancing act together. You and Gran were dancers? You betcha. We called ourselves the Grizzly Sweethearts. We knocked 'em dead in Peoria, which means that Peoria exists in Bear World, which I find fascinating. You and Gran were dancers? You betcha. Oh, really? I seem to remember Grizzly Gran being a vaudevillian and Grizzly Gramps not approving, and Grizzly Gran having to give up her life on the stage in order to be with Grizzly Gramps, an argument that was revived years later in one of the chapter books and almost led to their divorce, or at least their separation. Grizzly Gramps, if you recall, moved out of the house because of his memories of Grizzly Gran's vaudeville life, right? Her reviving the memory of once having been a vaudevillian was enough to drive Gramps out of her presence. He couldn't bear to look at her. Then in another book, we learned that Grizzly Gramps, that was how they met. He was a stage door Johnny. He fell in love with her as a performer. In another book, we learned that they actually met when he was working at a bowling alley and she used to come in and bowl, and that's how they met. Contradiction. Now we're getting a third version of the story, which is that they were actually seemingly a vaudeville act together. Now there's no indication in the Giddy Grandma, that's the book that the vaudeville story came from. There's no indication in Giddy Grandma that at any point did she and Gramps team up and perform together. There's no indication at any point that Gramps ever appeared on stage in any capacity. He's not a performer, he's a complainer. And those aren't necessarily, at odds with each other. I've known plenty of performers who complain a lot, but we've never been given any notion that Grizzly Gramps was ever a performer. So we're putting this down as yet another origin story for the relationship of Grizzly Gramps and Grizzly Gran, which I am coming to believe actually has a far more fascinating truth that either combines elements of all the stories or is simply something else entirely, or it's the most boring meet cute in the world. I thought meeting at a bowling alley, which is probably more likely what happened, was the most boring version, but who knows? So, here's where we get into the nitty-grit. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The Cubs turn the page, and what do they see? This is what I've covered before. And this is where we get into the ages of the Cubs, and the story of their births, and the origin of the Bears as a family. Who are those two attractive young bears, Brother asked. Why, that's your mama and papa in high school, said Gramps. And here is the sentence that shook the foundation of the Berenstain Bears collector's universe. Of course, they weren't Mama and Papa then, just Missy and Junior. And I've discussed this at length in its own episode, but with Missy being a nickname traditionally for Melissa, and Junior indicating that Papa Bear shares the same first name with Grizzly Gramps. And I believe, was it Save That Back Scratcher? I know I'm getting this wrong. One of the chapter books revealing that Grizzly Gramps' first name is Ernest. We know to a 95% certainty that Mama and Papa Bear's names in high school before they gave birth to a litter of pups was Melissa and Ernest, or Ernie and Melissa, as I always call them to the consternation of people. Ernie and Melissa Bear. All Sister says is they look so young, and Brother says and skinny, and Gramps is like, well, I guess we all used to be younger and skinnier. Ain't that the facts? Ain't that the truth, monsieur? But also, Brother and Sister and Honey don't respond to the whole Missy and Junior thing then, so obviously they know their parents' names. They just are not allowed to ever say them. But this book also answers a few other questions regarding the birthing of Brother. Because Assuming that Mama Bear was 19 when she had brother. She's graduated from high school. She's out of high school. There was talk online about the appropriateness of her giving birth at 19 and what that means, like, because Papa's a few years older than her. How old were they when they started? Clearly, they started dating in high school. We know that. If he is 2 years older than Mama, or at least 2 grades above Mama, we don't know. Was he held back? Did he start late? Who knows? I don't know how their grading system works. He graduates. They start seeing each other in high school, maybe her sophomore year. By the time she graduates, she's 18. My theory is Mama gets preg, right? It happens. They're young. They're in love. Grizzly Gramps is not the kind of guy to let his junior boy not make a woman a bride. You get him pregnant, son. You take him to the altar. Now, I bet Mama and Papa, Ernie and Melissa, were already planning on getting married, but I bet this put a bug in their butts and a bun in the oven to get up on that stage and say hallelujah to the Lord, we're getting married, which they did probably at the cabin or the church at the chapel in the woods. Whoops. Probably at the chapel in the woods. Preacher Brown probably wasn't there. He was a little boy at this time as well. He's a young man. I guess we all used to be younger and skinnier. Yeah, until we got pregnant, Gramps, and had to get married. So that's my theory. They get married, they move into a cave in the woods or a cave on the mountains, and they have their son Small. That's right. It says there's a photo. So now we turn the page and we see a bunch of pictures from previous Berenstain Bears books, except for the first one, which is of Brother Bear when he was a baby, because we don't really get to know him as a baby in the books. But it says, in quotes, which is weird, Small Bear. Because, again, he was not Brother Bear initially. That wouldn't have made any sense. He was Small Bear. The first photo we see of Sister absolutely makes no sense canonically. It is the photo from the end of the Berenstain Bear's New Baby, where she is punching Brother in the nose. I've read that book many times. There was nobody with a camera there. Nobody had a camera, which leads me to believe this is a staged recreation, a reenactment. They had Brother lean in again. They grabbed the camera. They waited until Sister punched him in the nose again. Obviously, he is not the same Brother Bear we saw in that book. He looks slightly different than in that book. I think it's because he's a little older. Put on some flesh in his face. He's not skinny like the little Small Bear was in that book. They scrunched Sister Bear down in her crib again and had her punch Brother in the nose. We see Sister Bear with her stuffy. We see them from the cover of Get Their Kicks, it looks like, playing soccer ball. We see the birth of Honey Bear. It's literally just an illustration from the Berenstain Bears Baby Makes 5. And we see the brother and sister and Honey posing. And Grizzly Gramps is like, you know what? You guys are the latest chapter in the Bear family story. Now, here's what's interesting. He says, you guys are the latest chapter in the Bear family story for now. But we can always add more pages when you cubs grow up and have cubs of your own. And Sister's like, cubs of our own? Gulp. And it reminds me of when I used to work at the bookstore. I mean, I do work at a bookstore, but at a different bookstore. And there was a little girl looking through a book, a family book, like a book like, where did I come from? What's a family? She's sitting by herself at a little desk we had set up in the kids section. Her mom is shopping somewhere in the store. And she's looking through this book, and all of a sudden she starts wailing. And the mom comes running up. She's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And the little girl's all, I don't want to have a baby. And the mom is like, what? And the little girl's like, I don't want to have a baby. And the mom looks, and it's a book that kind of lays it out for a kid, not where babies come from, but how babies come out. And I like to think that Sister is having the same reaction here. She's like, oh God, like the thought, like it's not just that I may have kids one day. I think for Sister, and she has this look on her face like, she looks angry at the thought of like pushing a human out of my body. No, thank you, sir, Grandpa. Also, it's weird that you brought that up. Don't bring that up, Grandpa. Don't bring that up. I don't want to think about it. Cubs of our own. Well, the book comes to an end with what the Cubs wanted in the first place, which was some delicious honey nut cake. Gramps is like, well, you can mull that over for a while. But enough family history. Come along. We'll join Gran downstairs. Now, I want to point out, once again, this is a Grizzly Gramps and Gran book, just like the Berenstain Bears go to Week of Grandmas. What was it called? Week of Grandmas. Another Grizzly Gramps and Gran book in which Gran does not have a line of dialogue. She's there and she smiles, but it's Gramps who does the talking. If this had ever been adapted into an animated episode, I know that they would have given Gran some prescient lines, but not so in this book. She keeps her lips zipped and serves the cake. But I do like this ending. I like the final statement, which is, it was just the thing to satisfy the hunger of a bunch of hardworking, deep-thinking young bears. That's right. These bears have a lot to think about, And that thing they're thinking about is reproducing, which they did not anticipate thinking about when they hopped on their bicycles that morning and rode to Grizzly Gramps and Grand's house. They thought they were going to hug their grandparents, maybe get a cookie or a slice of cake and go home. But now they're having to think about their futures and their pasts and their ancestors and all the rest. And that, my friends, is the Berenstain Bears Possessive S Big Family Album by Mike Berenstain, a book that I could not find in my house, no matter how hard I tried. Thank you so much for listening. This book, you can't find it. It is worth owning, and you can't find it. I like this book. It's interesting. It raises a lot of questions. Gets a lot of thinking going about where you come from, your family history, what it means to look up, your ancestors. How far removed from a person can you be and still consider them a family member? That's another thing that's made me think. I'm like, some of these people are so many degrees removed from me logically, but they're still my family? Is that true? Like, could I seek them out and be like, I'm a cousin, I'm a third cousin? Would they appreciate that or not? Would I have anything in common with any of these people? I don't know. Probably not. None of them have a Berenstain Bears podcast, I hope. Maybe that's why I don't get more listeners. There's a better one out there somewhere. I just don't know what it's called. In any case, that is the Berenstain Bears Big Family album from 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Uncle Morris, Aunt Emily, Gramps, and Gran are on the cover of it. Odd choice. I would have gone with Hezekiah. That's just me. But you can listen to me talk about more Berenstain Bears books at berenstainbearcast.org, because I'm an organization. Or you can tune into my other podcast, It's Del Toro Time, that I do with my older daughter, Willow, where we cover movies and books and all kinds of spooky dukes. Most of the stuff is genuinely related to Guillermo del Toro in some way. Like, they're movies that he really liked and recommended, so we watch those. We just did The Nightmare Before Christmas. We have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein coming up as soon as we can sit down and watch it. So tune in to that. All of my shows are available on YouTube at Phil Gonzalez or at Raffish Ripoff, which is how I have my channel listed. If you just search Raffish Ripoff, it'll show up. Or Phil Gonzalez, you'll recognize me. I'll pop up in the thumbnails. You'll be like, oh, it's the Berenstain Bears guy. If you want to watch me and you sort of see some of the pages of the books as I go through it, or just watch me wiggle around. I wiggle around a lot. I shimmy and shake. I open my eyes really big and I make big expressions. You would love it. It's like watching me on stage. I'm a big expression. In any case, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you all next time, deep in Bear Country.